Hiya. In this third video we are going to be continuing our series thinking about what is sin, and we're going to be looking at idolatry. Now I don't know what image in your mind is conjured up if I say the word idolatry. I think for most people there probably isn't anything, but if anything I would guess most people would think of bowing down to statues, stone statues, wooden statues, all that sort of thing. Think back to the ancient world, of Greece or Rome, where there were kind of each household had its own gods, and you would sort of pray to the gods in the statues. I don't know if you've seen that film Gladiator. Came out about quite a while ago now, actually. Just made me realise how old I am. But that film where you get the Maximus sort of praying to, I think, the little gods, and that was just common for the day, really. That was common for that time, praying to idols and worshipping them. And you might think, well, that kind of thing doesn't really go on anymore. But let me tell you that it does happen even in this day and age. I follow Catherine Jenkins on Twitter. Catherine Jenkins, the singer, and a few weeks ago she's been doing a sort of tour of Japan, and a few weeks ago she posted up a picture of herself next to an enormous statue. And I did a bit of research on this statue, and it's a statue in Japan of the Amitabha Buddha. It is 120 meters tall. 120 meters, that's huge. It was, when it was built in 1993, it was the highest statue in the world. So a really big statue. Just to put that into perspective, by the way, you may remember in the Old Testament when Nebuchadnezzar makes a statue, and it's in the book of Daniel chapter 3 verse 1. It talks about it, how his statue was, it says 60 cubits high. That is 27 meters, this gold statue, and he commanded everyone to bow down to it. And so this statue here, the Amitabha Buddha statue, that's about 5 times as big as Nebuchadnezzar's statue. It's absolutely enormous. Idol making is alive and well even in the world today. People still do make idols. But is it really relevant to us in the modern Western world? And that's why we're going to look at this topic as part of the What is Sin series, because I think a lot of people think idolatry is not really relevant to us, but actually it does really make a big difference. If we kind of look at what sin is, it's kind of like peeling back the onion layers and looking at what lies underneath. And what lies underneath sin on its surface level, actually you could say is idolatry. And that's one of the primary ways really that the Bible understands sin, if perhaps not the primary way, is of idolatry and worshipping other gods. So that's really what we're doing today. We're going to be thinking a bit about idolatry, and this is the first in 2 parts. Next time we're going to be looking at another passage from the book of Romans about what idolatry is. So let's dive in then, and we're going to be thinking about Jeremiah chapter 2, which is Jeremiah's a prophet in the Old Testament, and we're going to be thinking about Jeremiah chapter 2 to diagnose, if you like, idolatry, what idolatry is, and what it looks like. And I'm going to, again, this passage is not too long, so I'm going to read out the whole of this passage. It's Jeremiah 2, chapter 2, verses 9 to 19. Therefore I bring charges against you again, declares the Lord, and I will bring charges against your children's children. Cross over to the coasts of Cyprus and look. Send to Kedar and observe closely. See if there has ever been anything like this. Has a nation ever changed its gods? Yet they are not gods at all. But my people have exchanged their glorious God for worthless idols. Be appalled at this, you heavens, and shudder with great horror, declares the Lord. My people have committed 2 sins. They have forsaken me, the spring of living water, and have dug their own cisterns, broken cisterns that cannot hold water. Is Israel a slave by birth? Why then has he become plunder? Lions have roared, they have growled at him, they have laid waste his land, his towns are burnt and deserted. Also the men of Memphis and Tahpanhes have cracked your skull. Have you not brought this on yourselves by forsaking the Lord your God when he led you in the way? Now why go to Egypt to drink water from the Nile? And why go to Assyria to drink water from the Euphrates? Your wickedness will punish you. Your backsliding will rebuke you. Consider then and realize how evil and bitter it is for you when you forsake the Lord your God and have no awe of me, declares the Lord Almighty. So this is really a passage talking about idolatry, and I'm going to draw out, again, as we've been doing the past couple of times, I'm just going to be drawing out some lessons for us rather than going through the whole thing, drawing out some lessons for us, what we can learn about idolatry from this passage. And the first thing is that idolatry is appalling. You notice that in verse 12 it says, "Be appalled at this, shudder with great horror, declares the Lord." And then in verse 19 it talks about how evil and bitter it is to forsake God. In verse 10 and 11 he says, cross over and see if there's ever been anything like this. Has a nation ever changed its gods? Now what Jeremiah is saying and what God is saying is, look at the other nations. Have they ever changed their gods? Have they ever done anything like this? Even if their gods are not gods at all, they have never forsaken them and deserted them as you have deserted me. Now, and that's the thing, that how could anyone reject the one true God? How could anyone reject the God who made us and who gives us life and who gives us every good thing? And we'll think more about this in a moment. How can we reject God? That itself is an appalling thing. It's something which is almost unthinkable, and yet that is what we do. And this kind of reorients our ideas about what's important to God. Now, as we've seen a couple of times in this, that we think what's important to God is how we treat each other. And that is important, how we treat each other. But the most important thing actually is how we relate to God, how we worship Him, on whether we worship Him, all that sort of thing. Now, not just, if you like, the horizontal, our relationships with each other, but our relationships with God. Now, John Piper, pastor from America, he says, missions exist because worship doesn't. Missions exist because worship doesn't. So, we tell other people about Jesus, we proclaim Him because they don't worship Him. And the worship of Him is the most important thing. Where that doesn't exist, then God is not pleased. So the first thing, idolatry is appalling. Second thing, idolatry is forsaking God. And we saw this on a few occasions, and the word forsaken comes up several times in the passage. It says, verse 13, for example, my people have forsaken me. And then verse 17, have you not brought this on yourselves by forsaking the Lord your God? And verse 19, consider then, realize how evil when you forsake the Lord your God. So idolatry is turning away from God, turning away from the living God. Why is that a bad thing? Because as God said, He is, verse 13, the spring of living water. The spring of living water. He is the source, the spring, the fountain of life and everything good. And I think that image is a really well chosen one. A spring, a fountain, it's kind of never ending, it's flowing, it wells up and it bursts out. It's not something, God isn't some sort of dry, I just want you to kind of be have a boring life, I don't want anything good for you, I don't want you to flourish or anything. God's not like that. He's the spring of living water. He is the fountain of life and everything good. You think, why on earth would we turn away from that? Why on earth would we turn away from God, the source of everything good in our lives and in the world? Looking at how wonderful God is, just looking around at the universe, looking around at the beautiful world that we live in. That's kind of how amazing and powerful and good God is. So that's the second thing, that we forsake God. And then that leads to, third thing, that idolatry is turning to other gods. And that's the second part of it, really, forsaking God and then turning to other gods. That's what we see in verse 11. My people have exchanged their glorious God for worthless idols. And then again, they've forsaken me and dug their own cisterns, broken cisterns that cannot hold water. And that is what we do as well. You and I, we're made to worship. And when we stop worshipping God, we don't worship nothing. We have to, because we're made to do it, we have to fashion our own idols to worship. And it could be just about anything. It doesn't have to be statues, it doesn't have to be physical things. It can be other things. It can be family, for example. Sometimes we worship family, and we want our family to be the source of happiness and life and love in our lives. We want all of our identity really to derive from that, perhaps. Or sometimes people worship career. They seek to find everything, their source of happiness and life and everything in their career, or in money, or any number of other things. We turn to all sorts of things. It can be intangibles as well as kind of real physical things. And that's what we do. Someone once said that, you and I, we are made as worshipping beings. The only choice we have is what we worship. Now, not if we worship. We don't choose whether to worship or not. We only choose what we worship. And when we stop worshipping God, we worship other things instead. We forsake God, we turn from God and turn to idols. And the fourth thing is that idolatry is harmful and destructive. And that's what we see again, verse 13, about digging their own cisterns, broken cisterns that cannot hold water. And then he says in verse 11 that a nation has gods, yet they are not gods at all. And this is a really important thing, of course, to grasp, which is that idols cannot do what God can do. Idols cannot do what God can do. You might think, Phil, that's just obvious, isn't it? But it's funny how something so obvious we tend to ignore so much. Now, why is it that we look to other things instead of God for our happiness, for our joy, for our contentment, and serve them? Idols, they're terrible masters. And this is what people find, people who get to the top. I don't know if you've ever read about the experiences of someone, for example, who gets to the top of their career or who achieves their dream. Like tennis players who win Wimbledon and then they have to keep coming back for more because winning it once is not enough, of course. Or, people who achieve all the fame that they want. Now, Marilyn Monroe, she knew what it was to achieve fame. I think she was probably the most famous woman in the world of her day. And she once said, "Fame doesn't fulfill you. It warms you a bit, but that warmth is temporary." And she discovered, as many people do, that when you put all your trust in something like fame or career or something which is not God, then the effect might last for a while. It might make you happy for a while, but it will keep demanding more, and it will never ever give up. It will never really fulfill you and make you happy. And that's because we are created to worship God and not these other things. Now, the Israelites, from our passage in Jeremiah, they had trusted in Egypt. And what happened actually at this time when Jeremiah was writing was that the Israelites were under threat from an enemy army, and they, instead of seeking God and seeking his help, what they did is they turned to Egypt and they said, we'll make a treaty with Egypt. But of course it didn't work out, that the Egyptians didn't come and defend them, and they still got taken over. And that's why he says, why go to Egypt to drink water from the Nile, and so on. Saying, look, don't go to them, because they ultimately can't help you. Only I, the Lord says, can help you. He says, you brought this on yourselves. And that's what idolatry does. Really, when we turn aside from God, we bring trouble on ourselves. And that's really what sin is. In a sense, it's bringing trouble on ourselves by turning away from God. We turn away from worshipping him. We turn away from his ways. We think that we can do better ourselves. We can make ourselves happier on our own terms. And we can't. And that is the real tragedy of it. But the fifth thing, and I wanted to finish on a positive note, the fifth thing is that Jesus can heal our idolatry. And this passage in Jeremiah talks about living water. And Jesus also talked about living water in John's Gospel, John chapter 4, verses 13 and 14. This is the story of Jesus talking to a woman at the well. That's what it's known as, the woman at the well. And this is what Jesus said. Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life. So Jesus says that he is the one, when we come to him, he will give us that living water which wells up to eternal life. Now Jesus is the one who can heal our idolatry, who can help us turn from our idols to serve God alone. And he can give us that living water. And that's the wonderful thing, that we see where idolatry leads us. But actually, when we turn to Jesus, he is the one who can heal us. He is the one who can help us and restore God's image in us by the power of the Holy Spirit. And those are wonderful words, I think, hopeful words to finish with, that as all the way through, as we're thinking about what sin is, I hope that we're growing in our understanding of sin, but also growing in our appreciation of what Jesus came to do. And certainly as we go through, I really hope that we're thinking not just about, sin is such a terrible thing, but actually looking more to Jesus as the one who can heal us and help us in our sinfulness. So thank you very much for watching this video. Please do click on the like button, the little thumbs up icon down below the video if you've enjoyed it. And if you want to see the next videos in this series, as I said, next time we'll be talking about idolatry again from Romans chapter 1. If you want to see that video, click on the subscribe button down below, and you'll get, if you click on the notification, the bell icon, you'll be notified every time I upload a new video. You'll get an email and a YouTube notification. So thank you very much for watching this video. I hope to see you again for another video very soon. God bless.